the most important of your own affairs. And this particular series of cases actually brought by the state, the things you need to decide beyond a reasonable doubt are who strangled these women? Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Who wrapped them in plastic? Beyond a reasonable doubt. Who buried them? Beyond a reasonable doubt. And was it done with prior calculation and design? I mean, folks, this is the 21st century, not the 1850s. We have scientific technology available to us to help us solve these very difficult cases. It's not just, oh, Sowell's house must have done it. We have the technology to do testing that can help us decide these things. Something you need to ask yourself is, was it employed here? Was that technology that's available employed in this particular case? You're not here to speculate. You're not here to solve a mystery. You're here to decide whether the state proved their case. When you look at the definition of prior calculation design, look at that closely. Look at the physical evidence in this case. Does the physical evidence in this case support prior calculation and design? There's no rhyme or reason to where these women were found. There's no order. Most had ligatures of some sort or another. Not all. Most were undressed in some way. One wasn't. Some were found on the third floor, south bedroom, kind of just laying there with some plastic and things thrown on top of them. One was found in the basement under a mound of dirt, some buried in the backyard. There's no rhyme or reason to this. And when you look at the ligatures, there's no consistency there. None. It seems to be whatever was at hand. From a sleeve from a shirt to an electrical cord of some sort to a purse strap of some sort. There's no rhyme or reason to these ligatures, especially the ones around the neck. You know, the burden of proof always remains on the state of Ohio. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they use every tool at their disposal to prove the case? To prove who strangled these women, wouldn't you want to test the ligatures? Just one of them. Just one time. One off the ankle. One off the wrist. One off the neck of any of these women. Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you even try? This is not the 1850s. It's the 21st century. This man, who's an honorably discharged United States Marine, deserves better. The 11 women whose bodies were found, they deserve better. And you, as a juror, you deserve better. But the state didn't even try. I think this trial can be broken down into 3 sections, 3 broad categories. One concerns the testimony of the addicted and mostly mentally ill women. The second part concerns the incomplete, some may say incompetent investigation of the crime scene. And a third section concerns the long video that you saw over a couple of days and that you'll have with you. Let's talk about the video for a moment. I think it's useful for you to think of this case concerning those 3 broad topics. What do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about the homicides for a moment. The first section concerning these women who testified, there's no question the state wants you to believe, but for the grace of God, those women would have been killed. That's what they want you to believe. All right? That's why that testimony is here. The second part concerns the crime scene investigation. If you had to decide this case just on the crime scene investigation, what would your decision be? Perhaps it's helpful for you to think about it in that way. If you just had the crime scene, what would your decision be? Now, obviously, you don't just have that. You also have the video. But what did the video really add to the case? Think about that for a moment. What did the video really add to the case? Most of the video were the two detectives talking to the defendant, questioning him, trying to get information from him. Well, he certainly did his fair share of talking. I dare say 80% of that video were the detectives talking. Think about what he said, not what they said. And they were using leading questions, and there's nothing improper about that. But that's what it is, our leading questions. He kept saying, and you can go back and look at this and take your time and look at the whole thing if you want, or sections of it. But what he was telling those detectives was, I can't remember. I don't know. I can't remember. He was hearing voices. The voices wouldn't let him go in that room. They didn't buy it. No question about it. They weren't buying what he was saying. But look at his demeanor. Look, he had his hands in his head. He was in pain. He was rubbing his pacemaker, especially at the beginning, based on the anxiety that was going on, I'm sure. That man was trying to help. He wasn't able to, but they weren't buying it. They weren't buying it. But think about what he said, because they're the ones that suggested 95% of the answers. And he kept saying, I don't know, I don't remember, it was all a dream, I don't know fantasy from reality. And you know, the state of Ohio wants you to think that this case is all about a man who was spurned by a woman and fell into drug addiction and committed all these horrible crimes. Really? I mean, really? Is that what's going on? Then, you know, there's a lot of people in the city of Cleveland and elsewhere who have been spurned by a lover and who have addiction problems, and they're not out killing everybody. That's not what's going on. That's not realistic. There's something else going on, and it's the voices in his head. That's what's going on. And if you remember towards the very end of that long interrogation on the 31st, towards the very end, you look at the windows and it's black. It's night outside. And there's a period of time when he's left alone. The two detectives go out and he's left alone. All right? And remember, he doesn't know he's being recorded. He doesn't know that. They didn't tell him that. But he's there, and he's at one point he's looking out the window, and then you see him mumbling to himself. And then at some point the detectives come back in the room, and one of them, I forget which one, but one of them asked him, have you heard the voices today? And he says, yeah, just a few minutes ago. That's what that mumbling was. He was talking back to the voices in his head. Now, you know, these detectives, they have an extremely difficult job. No question about it. They're homicide detectives. They're overworked, underpaid. No question about it. They're also undertrained. I mean, imagine if your boss tells you you've got to deal with addicted, mentally ill people on a regular basis, and you have no training in how to do it. You have no training. I mean, they don't. And that's sad. Because you know from the testimony that they have to deal with mentally ill people all the time. They testified to that, but they have no training in what to recognize, what to look for, how to deal with these people. They say, man up. Come on. Man up. That's what you do to someone who's mentally ill, just man up. You know, with respect to these homicide victims, there's not one count charging rape or attempted rape. Now, within the kidnapping, within one of those kidnapping charges, there is some sexual activity alleged. No question about that. But what evidence do you have that there's any forced sex on any of the homicide victims? I mean, these women had difficult lifestyles. I'm not going to go over that again. But you heard the testimony. A lot of these women were selling their bodies for drugs, living lifestyles that most people would not approve of. Is there any evidence that there was any forced sex on any of the homicide victims? I suggest there isn't. Yeah, were they unclothed? Yeah, a lot of them were unclothed or partially unclothed. But was there any forced sex on them? We just don't know. It's speculation. It's absolute speculation. And it's, you know, in the video, what Mr. Sowell says more than once, if I'm not mistaken, is something went wrong after he passed out or went to sleep. He would wake up and it was like they were gone. That's an amazing statement. But I think it was, if you look at the video, it's a sincere statement. And it suggests that something happened with him, something happened with these voices in him. There was no prior calculation designed for this, none whatsoever. Now let's talk about for a moment the police. When I say the police, I'm talking about the Cleveland police in general. You heard all these poor family members from these homicide victims come in at the beginning of the trial, one after another, testify about the struggles they had with their loved ones. Many were very concerned. They would try to file missing persons reports. A lot of times the police didn't even want to take them. Can you imagine that? I mean, that's just unbelievable. Here we are in the 21st century. People, loved ones are saying, my daughter, my wife, my whoever is gone. We don't know where they are, and the police won't even take a report. So these people are left to their own devices. Making up flyers, putting them out there, holding rallies, doing what they can do to try to find a loved one because the police won't. And Detective Smith testified early on that by November 3rd, they had their mind made up. The case was over on November 3rd. They had their mind made up as to what happened. Why investigate at that point? Why even send the stuff down to the coroner's office? Detective Smith said they had their guy on November 3rd. And you know, you're going to have lots of photographs from the crime scene. And I went through this in my cross-examination, but the way they treated that crime scene is unbelievable as well. They trampled that crime scene. Now, admittedly, when they first went in there to execute this warrant, they didn't know what they were going to find, of course not. But once they found those bodies, did they set up a perimeter? Did they say, oh my God, we got a double homicide scene here. We got to protect this to figure out what happened. Did they do that? No. You'll have the crime log, and I went over it with the witness, but I asked you to take a few minutes during your deliberations and look at that crime scene log and the perimeter. It was just a few minutes there was a perimeter set up. And if you look at the photos, of the backyard, could they fit any more people in the backyard? People standing around. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know who they are. They're walking around like it's almost an entertainment venue. And then what do? They bring in a backhoe from the water department to dig up the backyard. I mean, folks, you heard about trace evidence. You heard how important fibers are, how important pieces of hair are, what a bottle cap can make you think, perhaps. What do you think that backhoe did to the crime scene? It destroyed it. Look at the pictures for yourself. Don't take my word. Look at those pictures. And you heard that they did, that the coroner's office did not have what they call a forensic archaeologist, fancy phrase, all right? But you've all seen, I'm sure, at one point or another, National Geographic, public TV, one of these many TV stations we have, when they're excavating a grave site or an old archaeological site, how careful they are. They mark it off. They measure it, they mark it off. They go through with like trowels and brushes and trying to find whatever they're looking for. Was there anything close to that here? No, you've got a backhoe from the water department, digging it up. God knows what evidence they lost there. You know, they treated this crime scene much the way they treated the families of the victims when they tried to report a missing, with no respect. And you saw the testimony concerning many family members who communicated by cell phone with their loved ones of these 11 women that died. Either the family member had cell phones, some of the victims had cell phones, I think the testimony was. You'll recall that testimony. Have you seen one cell phone record here? Have you seen one cell phone record? We've all got cell phones or know someone that has cell phones. You know the detailed billing that comes with that. Have you seen one phone record here concerning any of the victims? And you saw pictures of multiple cell phones. Was that investigated? No. Were those the victim's cell phones? Who knows? Wasn't investigated. You saw a digital camera they found. They took a picture of it laying on the defendant's bed. Did they recover any photos from that? Apparently not.